Hey guys, Nick Campanella from Taylor Timepieces here, and on today's episode I wanted to talk about something really interesting as we just had Memorial Day weekend. I hope you guys had a safe and fun weekend. It really got me thinking about watches and their military history and how some pieces might owe their very existence to wars and essentially watches on the battlefield. To me, it's really interesting to think about how wars didn't just change borders. It really changed the way that we tell time. And I wanted to make this video and dive into how military demands and other military-related actions really led to the evolution of some of the most modern and interesting wristwatches that we have here today. And of course there is, the fact that before World War One, you really only saw people with pocket watches. In the trenches, it was really difficult, of course, to have these pieces and carry these pocket watches around. I do have a couple pocket watches myself. One of which is a really cool Tiffany piece, but most people these days really only use pocket watches as more of a statement piece when it comes to fashion. Since another passion of mine is, of course, styling and menswear, it's awesome to have these pieces as statement pieces, but in all actuality, they are very difficult, and they're not very feasible when it comes to carrying a lot of pieces around, and it just wasn't practical to have something like that, something with wired lugs, rather, and eventually they started putting it on their wrist, and the wristwatch was born. It was rugged and luminous and easy to read at a glance. And that was important because, of course, in all these military servicemen, when you're looking at a timepiece, you have to be able to look, right away and know what time it is for whatever, know what time you need to be somewhere, know how much time you have to get out of an area, to get into an area. And, as cool as it was now to have these really intricate and unique dials, back then when wristwatches were really just starting out, you needed something that was legible and easy to read, and something that you wouldn't take time to have to look at a dial. And back then it was important because you took extra seconds that you might not have had. Of course, there are a lot of really cool vintage trench watches out there right now. You have, a lot of Omega has a lot of World War I models. It's not something that we currently have in stock. As of right now, I'm doing this video pretty late at night on Memorial Day weekend day, on that Monday night, to make sure I have something out for you guys, so we're not in the office to take a look at the pieces that we have. But there are so many. There's Elgin. It's awesome to have. We've had an Elgin. We recently sold an Elgin watermelon for all of those people that know, the 50s and 60s area of watches. Early Rolexes really came into its more modern form. Back then, you had these wristlets that really were unique, and they really set the brand apart to make it, not just a British brand, but a worldwide brand eventually. And now it's known as the Golden Crown, and everybody loves Rolex, and everybody really is excited to see what Rolex has. So to me, I think it's really interesting to read this history and kind of know not just where we're going, but where we came from and how watches came to be. So then you had, of course, World War II, and with World War II, it really brought about a lot of mass production. You had to look at, essentially taking these, at one time, these really intricate wristwatches that were, maybe made in the hundreds or, in some cases the thousands, and really upping the production of these pieces to make it available for the everyday consumer. In the U.S. military, you had, at this point, watches issued to you based on your position in the military. They had, of course, Belova and Elgin, which again is a favored vintage brand of a favored vintage brand of mine. I have a couple Elgin, and I think they're super cool pieces. I think for what they are, they're totally awesome. I think that true vintage pieces don't get enough love and accompaniment these days, and they don't get a lot of coverage. So it's really interesting to have these brands that people may not know in the watch box. So you had the rise of a lot of other pieces. You had Longines and the IWC, and it really had a lot of strict specifications at the time. It had to, make sure that, of course, they were up to code to be able to serve the military, the world's military, to the best of its ability. So, if you look at like an IWC pilot's watch, it's very rare that, these days you're using it for those purposes. But back then, you had a Breitling Navitimer to use in flying. You had a Submariner to dive and submerge. And that's something that, a lot of people really take for granted is the usability of a lot of these pieces. Back then there were a lot of key features that they really wanted on these pieces. You had, black dials and Arabic numerals. You had hacking seconds. And of course, water resistance and durability was super important when you were out in the field, because you had to make sure that, no matter what terrain you were fighting against, that your watch was functional. And of course, these black dials were important because, as cool as these colored dials were, you wanted to be discreet, around the enemy. So you didn't want to wear these really tropical colors of these, APs and these, different, you look at, like, we had recently a Frank Mueller Crazy Hours. That's not a piece that, would do well in the military setting, even though I think that it's a beautiful piece. Hublot Tutti Frutti does not belong in the battlefield. So, back then it was these black dials, in some cases white, but it was Arabic numerals because you wanted to make sure that, you were very easily reading these dials. I think to also keep in mind is back then, not a lot of the soldiers were, able to read these things. Back then the literacy rate was much different than it is now. So you had people, you don't want to, have a soldier out in the field looking to see what time it is, and then he blows up because he can't read a Roman numeral dial. And again, that was just a sign of the times. They wanted simple and easy because they were working with people that were, in that mindset. They were working with people that were on the go. And I think it's really interesting to see how that's evolved throughout time. And then of course you have, you have, of course, these dive watches, and as warfare extended past the trenches, I think there was a need for these robust waterproof watches, and it's something that we really take advantage of these days, because I can't remember the last time I know somebody that went diving with a Submariner. That's when the Black Pen 50,000 was born. We just posted one of these earlier this weekend, and it was, born from these military contracts. And the fact that the Navy needed something, especially the frogmen, they needed something that were not just interesting pieces, but useful tools. That's something that we don't talk about a lot these days in watches is, basically how the tools that we wear every day as these statement pieces and these accessories get used, as genuine tools to, make our lives better. And tachometers for, drivers and racers, and, chronometers and things like that, chronographs. And, it's pieces that we always ask, hey, does this have a chronograph? I know that as a watch dealer, it's very rare that someone, when they're asking me, about the water resistance and the, all these different features on a watch that these gentlemen, or, in some cases, of course, these women that we sell to are going to use these features. But back then, especially in the field, you needed to be able to use these features. So perfect example, something we discussed earlier was, those pilots, they needed legibility and they needed functionality at all different altitudes. That's when a lot of German engineering watches, came into play. You had U-boat was a really interesting piece at the time. U-boat is something that doesn't really get a lot of love these days. But you had, essentially during the war, these Allied pilots, they would put on these Longines and these Omega chronographs. They would have a trend where, they wore these pieces, again, not as a statement piece, but as a way to help them be better and more capable pilots. And, I really wish that was something we really took advantage of these days, because these watches have wonderful and amazing tools that we just don't take full advantage of. You, of course, had, different digital watches as, military watches progressed throughout the, throughout the years. Today, from what I know about military watches is, I have cousins in the military that, they wear Casios, or they wear, these other really interesting pieces. Luminex is an awesome thing. If any of you guys are fans of The Last of Us, with Pedro Pascal, that just had its season finale the other day. Luminex watches, and the fact that these watches were built for durability. They were built for solar charging and GPS, and look at the Breitling Endurance Pro, things like that. They were built for essentially all-terrain situations. But in their DNA, it's really important to have, of course, that precision of any old modern watch. And I think these days, a lot of people don't realize that, watches are an important tool, and a lot of people hate on these brands that, I think are really interesting and necessary. I mean, my brother is he's a doctor. He wears a Garmin. My cousin, he's in the military. He wears a G-Shock. These are brands that may not get a lot of love from a collector standpoint, but from a durability and functionability standpoint, they're great for people in the military. And again, even if you're not in the military, I think that the military didn't just influence, watch design. I think it really shaped entire brands. You have, brands like Rolex and Seiko and Hamilton, these brands that were built, Rolex was initially just a British brand. So I mean, these brands that were built for essentially the reason to be used as a military item are now are now known as these collector's pieces, and a lot of people wear them as casual wear. But again, it's just really important to know that every watch has a story. And when I think of watches in general and watch collecting, I think every wrist has a story. That's one of the real key points. That's why I try to get involved with everyone who contacts me. We recently had somebody contact us saying how much they enjoyed these videos, so I very much appreciate that. If you enjoy these videos as well, please give us a like and a follow. And if you're in the military, thank you for your service. I wouldn't be here, and so many people would not be here if it wasn't for you. So again, please write us down below if there's any really cool and interesting military-inspired watches that you'd like to share with us, whether that be Bell & Ross, whether that be Rolex, Seiko, Hamilton, whatever it is. I always like seeing what you guys have on your wrist and what you have in your collection. So again, I appreciate you guys giving this a watch, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.